Hi, Jack Canfield here, and welcome to another episode of Talking About Success. My next guest has been a psychotherapist for over 20 years, and as a former sufferer of anxiety, Jodi now spreads her message of hope that anxiety is curable. And in her best-selling book, You Won Anxiety Zero, she does that in her book and on stages all over the world. So as a psychotherapist, what is the problem or the issue that most people bring to you, and how do you work with that?
Well, that's a good question. I've been doing this for 20 years. I worked with about 35 people a week and about 50 weeks a year. And in each of those hours, we unpacked about 2 or 3 problems each. And I did the math, and over that time, I helped people with 105,000 problems.
105,000?
105,000 problems. And you know what was behind each and every one of them?
You're going to tell me.
Yes, fear and guilt. And really, if you look at it, they're really both the same thing. The underlying fear that we all have is fear that we're unworthy, and that's guilt. And so I decided, and plus I had my own experience with anxiety, and so I, figured out how to help them with it, how to unpack the power of fear and guilt in our life, and how to get rid of it, move past it, get rid of those obstacles.
Now, you come from a place of having been a sufferer of anxiety yourself, right?
Yeah.
So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I started, I was introduced to anxiety when I was just 5 years old.
5?
Yeah, 5 years old.
Wow.
when I found out that we die. And I found out by asking my father where the presidents were on one President's Day, 1 February 1977. And I was like, where are the presidents now, Daddy? And his face got really white and his neck got really long. And I realized that death was a bad thing. He said, they're dead. And I said, what's dead? I was like, I still didn't realize it. But I saw the energy change in him, and I realized there's suffering in the world, and that if we could lose what we have, then there is no security. And that idea struck such panic in me that I suffered for about 20 years on and off. Anxiety came and went in my life. That first time and other episodes, I lost a lot of weight. I couldn't go out. I couldn't be alone. I really struggled a long time.
So what was it that got you, like a piece of advice or an encounter, or what moved you through that? What got you on the other side of it?
Well, I'm a social worker, so I was working in a psychiatric center, and we're in these meetings, and people talked about the worst cases. And over for weeks, I would hear these stories about people who struggled so much with anxiety that they were just paralyzed in their life. And for a couple weeks in a row, I was like, oh, I'm worse. I'm worse than these worst cases, and I'm supposed to be the one helping them, And so one day in a meeting, I just started to panic so much, and I decided I just had to get up and leave. And when you're so full of panic, you just want to escape. And so I walked out of the room slowly. I thought everyone saw my face and knew what was happening, But I backed out of the room, and I just flew down the stairs and got into my car. And as I was backing out, I looked in that rearview mirror. I saw my father's face, I was pale, my neck was long, and I took a breath, and I felt a little bit better, and I took another breath, and I thought, if I could learn this, then I could unlearn it, and I set to finding the answer. And I really had to learn, first of all, understood the biology of fear, like what's really happening, and then realized that anxiety has a lot of tricks to hold its power. So I had to learn those lies that it tells. And that third thing is I had to cultivate my control. I had to stop looking at where I was so out of control in my life and start thinking about where I did have control, and put my attention there and feel totally different then.
Now we're talking about anxiety, but then we're talking about panic attacks. It seems like there's like a continuum of like anxiety, I'm going to take this test, or I'm going to meet this person,
Yeah.
I'm a little anxious, to a full-blown panic attack.
Oh, we call anxiety so many different names. We call it embarrassment, we call it desperation, we call it discomfort, we call it stress, we call it overwhelm, we call it fear. It's all the same hormones being released. All those things, we call them so many different things. And so I speak to anybody who's having those feelings. So it's just an interesting problem because we call it different things. And some have stigma and some don't. I don't think, even though I'm a psychotherapist, I don't think of anxiety as a mental health issue. It could take anybody and we're human, and so of course we're going to have some fear because there's a biological feature in us for survival to do that. But I describe anxiety as a leftover fear response when we're not in physical danger. So that release of hormones when we don't need it, that just causes suffering, and we don't need that at all. And so I speak to how to untrigger the brain and how to think about the world differently. It changes your relationship with yourself, your relationship with people around you, and your relationship with the world, really.
Okay, so let's go back over it. I'm about to have a panic attack. I'm thinking of a panic attack. My breathing's getting all whacked out, or I'm sweating. My palms are sweaty. What do I do again?
That's, well, at first you think, well, thanks, amygdala. Thank you so much. If I needed you, that would be so amazing that you responded this way. But right now I'm not in physical danger. What happens is the message from the amygdala to the cortex is very, very strong because we need that for survival. And the amygdala works amazing. But the message when the cortex analyzes the situation and there's no physical danger, the message system back to the amygdala is not so strong. We have to do that heavy lifting. And if we are not afraid of it, it goes away pretty fast. And so if we have that appreciation, thanks amygdala, I'm so glad you're there if I needed you, but right now I'm okay. We're not afraid of it. It's going to calm us down faster. But we have this power and this gratitude that really changes everything.
Now, is there anything we can do on a day-to-day level so we don't find ourselves in that place?
Absolutely. Build trust in ourselves. The anxiety epidemic in America and the world is because we don't trust ourselves. It's because of our low self-esteem. And that's because we compare ourselves constantly and we just never feel like enough. There's all these cultural standards that we have to live up to. And so I tell people that every night you write down 3 things that you accomplished that day. 3 successes, 3 things you'd accomplished, because all we do is look at our deficits and all the things that we didn't get to. And that's overwhelming for us and we feel out of control. So if we looked at and started to see the skills that we do have, then we would start to build trust in ourselves, knowing that we had skills. See, anxiety comes because we think we can't handle something, because we think we don't have skills to handle it. When we start to write that down day after day, we change our relationship with ourselves and we trust ourselves, and anxiety can't really come.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So your book, you won anxiety 0. That's like the final score. You won the football game.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, exactly. So how is your book different from other books out there on the topic?
Well, I take down the power of anxiety. Anxiety has a lot of power, and a lot of the books out there on anxiety give you skills to, cultivate your control or try to calm yourself once you're anxious. Well, I don't want anxiety to come in the first place. And so in my book, I take away the power of anxiety by looking at all the tricks and the tactics that anxiety uses. There's a lot of lies that anxiety tells, like you can't handle it and you can't make decisions and this is going to be worse and all these things. And so I outlined 15 of those. And if you know that they're lies and realize they seem so logical and truths, and so they take us over, we believe them. And so if you knew that they were lies, you could see them coming a mile away and they wouldn't take you over anymore. That's how it works.
So some of this self-talk I've been doing, if I realize it's a lie when I'm in a rational state of mind, I'm educated about this. When it shows up, I go, oh, you're just...
Exactly, because anxiety makes you forget what you know. When you're in that state, you forget what you know, but if you repeat it over and over, you don't forget it. When the anxiety comes, it's right there in your mind. And so we use a lot of repetition, a lot of affirmations to switch that, to have it be so present when anxiety comes that you don't forget it. It's
Very
available
cool.
to you.
Now, it seems to me that everyday stress is just part of life.
Yeah.
But what's the difference between stress and maybe anxiety, maybe in realizing I have an issue where I say, maybe I should be seeking help?
That's a good question. It's still the same hormones. So stress is the same hormones. It's adrenaline, norepinephrine, and cortisol. Cortisol is more of a general one. The norepinephrine and the adrenaline are the immediate ones. But so you could call it stress or you could call it anxiety. And stress usually is referred to like a lower level. And yes, we all have discomfort in our lives that might trigger those hormones to be released. And it's the meaning that we make around them that makes a difference. So if we make a meaning and we beat ourselves up about it, of course it's going to cause more suffering. If we're like, oh yeah, that's adrenaline because this is an uncomfortable situation, and we stick with it and we're not afraid, we don't suffer. That's the difference. And so if you're suffering, if it's keeping you from doing things in your life that you might want to do, If it's holding you back at all, then you could get help. But that help could look like so many different things. You could read a book, talk to a friend, go to a counselor, go take one of my online programs, something, to help yourself. There's so many options out there.
Very cool. Now, I read something recently, and like your point of view about it, that the feeling occurs even before the thought.
Yes.
And there's this rush of like all this neurochemical
Yes.
wash that you talked about. Someone said, I'm trying to remember the term, I can't remember, it was something like rush and then brush, like brush it off or something. But it's like the reality is that you get this chemical rush before you even know that the mind has to respond after that.
Exactly, because the amygdala works on an emotional memory. Mm-hmm. So the trigger for the fear response is from an emotional memory because it happens much faster than cognitive thought.
Right.
And so that's done for survival. Mm-hmm. So there's an emotional memory. It could be a sound or a sight or someone yelling. It could just be a feeling of weirdness, or it could be a confusion. Because if you think about it, thousands of years ago when we were walking around the woods, if things felt weird, you could be in danger. Mm-hmm. That's why these things trigger us now. But so that could come from our genetics. We do have that history from our ancestors that does trigger our amygdala also. Mm-hmm. So the amygdala gets triggered by the emotional memory because it's faster. And so the amygdala triggers the body, that adrenaline, norepinephrine kicks off, and then it sends a message to the cortex. And now the cortex is involved. And the cortex could say, okay, run, or it could say everything's fine. But what I see happening with all the people I talk to is that the amygdala gets triggered, it goes off, the adrenaline, norepinephrine. The message goes to the cortex, and the cortex says, I don't see danger, but I feel it. So keep pumping those hormones. Now that's anxiety. We're not in danger, but we keep pumping it because it feels so scary. And so I teach people how not to be afraid. I take down the power of anxiety.
Cool.
And then it helps them.
So you have your book, you have other resources. Tell people how to get in touch with them.
Yeah, I have some online programs helping people get over anxiety, a general program for kids and adults. I have a flying anxiety and a driving anxiety program. And you could find me on jodiaman.com, JODIAMAN.com.
JodiAman.com.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you for
Thanks so
sharing all
much.
this with us. So listen out there, fear does not have to stop you so much anymore. Anxiety, panic, all that stuff, there is a solution. So make sure you get a copy of her book, go to her website, check out what she can do for you, because I want you to be successful, and you don't want fear and anxiety stopping you. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this message.